Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I grew up in what looked like a perfect family from the outside. Nice house in the suburbs, successful father who worked in real estate, and a stay-at-home mother who always made sure we looked presentable in public. But behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. My mother was a master of keeping appearances. She'd dress me in the nicest clothes, style my hair perfectly, and parade me around like her precious doll. But the moment we were alone or with people she trusted, the mask would come off. I was born with a narrow jaw and large teeth, which resulted in prominent buck teeth. Instead of getting me the orthodontic treatment I needed, my mother turned it into her favorite weapon against me. She constantly mocked me, making sure to point it out to everyone who'd listen. She would laugh and tell her friends to look at my teeth, joking that I could drill through a mountain with them. Her friends would always give awkward chuckles in response. She'd also call me over, introducing me as her little beaver and telling everyone to watch how I could chew through wood. I learned to stop smiling. I'd keep my mouth closed in photos, and I'd cover my mouth when I laughed. My father saw what was happening but never stood up to her. He'd just give me sad looks and buy me ice cream afterward, as if that would make up for his silence. The worst part was that my mother had a drinking problem. She spent hundreds of dollars on expensive liquor while buying the cheapest possible groceries for us. My lunch would be plain white bread with a single slice of processed cheese, while she'd sip on top-shelf whiskey every night. That Sunday, we went to the grocery store. As usual, she headed straight for the liquor aisle and grabbed a bottle of Crown Royal. She was in an especially nasty mood that day because earlier she had made fun of my teeth at breakfast, and I had accidentally started crying in front of her friends. She had scolded me for being sensitive, telling me that I was just hearing the truth and suggesting that my being a crybaby was the reason I didn't have any friends. When we stood in line at the checkout, I noticed how packed the store was. There were at least 5 people in front of us, and the lines on either side were just as long. My mother placed the Crown Royal on the conveyor belt, and that's when something in me snapped. All those years of humiliation and pain bubbled up to the surface. I put on my whiniest, most attention-grabbing voice, the kind that makes everyone turn and look. I loudly asked her why she always bought expensive alcohol but never any real food. The entire store seemed to freeze. People turned to stare at us. I continued by complaining about how I was tired of eating plain bread for lunch while she drank expensive whiskey every night. My mother's face turned bright red. For once, she was the one feeling humiliated. She harshly whispered at me to be quiet right now. I pressed on, asking her why we couldn't afford my dentist appointment last week but could buy this expensive bottle. An elderly woman in the next line overheard and questioned my mother, asking if it was true that she was denying her child medical care while buying luxury liquor. My mother abandoned the bottle and dragged me out of the store. She was furious, but for the first time I didn't feel scared. I had exposed her true nature to everyone, just like she always exposed my insecurities. The next day, my father finally took a stand. He'd received calls from 2 different neighbors who were at the store, and he couldn't ignore the situation anymore. He scheduled my orthodontist appointment and started divorce proceedings shortly after. My mother's carefully crafted image was shattered that day at the grocery store. She tried to spin the story, but word had spread through our community. Her friends stopped inviting her to their gatherings, and she could no longer pretend to be the perfect mother she wanted everyone to believe she was. 3 years later, I had braces and lived primarily with my father. My mother had to attend mandatory counseling and alcohol addiction meetings as part of the custody agreement. I moved to America 15 years ago from Vietnam. Back home, I learned the art of butchery from my father, who ran a small meat shop in Hanoi for 40 years. When I arrived in the United States, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously: dishwasher in the morning, construction worker in the afternoon, and night security guard. Every penny I saved went toward my dream of opening my own butcher shop. After 7 years of barely sleeping and endless work, I finally had enough money to open my store in a modest neighborhood. The community welcomed me warmly and business grew steadily through word of mouth. People appreciated my attention to detail and the quality of my cuts. I even started getting customers from other neighborhoods who drive specifically to my shop. That's until last week when this woman walked in. The moment she entered, I could tell something was off. She was scanning the store with this disgusted look on her face, like she'd smelled something rotten. She walked straight to the counter, completely ignoring the other customers waiting in line. She demanded to speak to whoever owned the place. When I told her I was the owner, her face twisted into an even nastier expression. She then launched into a speech about how she'd been watching this store and seeing how much money you people make off of Americans. I tried to politely tell her there was a line and if she wanted to purchase something, she needed to wait her turn. This only made her angrier. She started yelling about being an American citizen, that this was her country, and that I was only here because they allowed me to be here. By this point, the other customers were staring in disbelief. Some had their phones out recording. She then made her absurd demand. She believed that since I was making money in her country, I should provide her children with free meat every day. According to her, it was the least I could do to show my gratitude. When I refused and told her to leave if she wasn't planning to purchase anything, she became even more hostile, screaming about how they gave me the American dream and claiming her tax dollars probably paid for my store anyway. She started grabbing packages of meat from the display case, stuffing them into her purse. When I threatened to call the police, she encouraged me to do so, insisting that the American police would understand she was just claiming what was rightfully hers. For 20 minutes, I tried to reason with her while she ranted about immigration, her rights as an American citizen, and how people like me were stealing opportunities from real Americans. I stayed quiet, hoping she'd tire herself out and leave. Instead, she started throwing raw meat at me. That's when I'd had enough. I grabbed my largest meat cleaver, the one I use for splitting whole pigs. I didn't point it at her, but I made sure she saw it. I told her to get out immediately. She tried to intimidate me by threatening to call immigration on me. I told her that I was a citizen just like her and repeated my demand for her to leave. I took one step toward her with the cleaver at my side. She ran out screaming threats about having my store shut down and getting me deported. 2 days later, police officers came to my store, not to arrest me, but to show me all the social media videos of the incident that my customers had posted. Turns out she'd tried to file a complaint, but quickly withdrew it when they told her about the multiple videos showing her assault and attempted theft. The local news even picked up the story. My business has doubled since then, with people coming in specifically to show their support. Some even bring their children to teach them about treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background. The woman never came back, but I keep the cleaver a bit closer to the counter these days, just in case. Let me tell you about my cousin. She's the kind of person who always has to one-up everyone else, constantly brags about her achievements, and never misses a chance to put others down. We grew up together, and I always tried to maintain a decent relationship with her despite her attitude, mainly because our mothers are sisters and family gatherings are inevitable. Things really went south between us 3 years ago when she managed to convince our grandmother to give her the family heirloom jewelry that was supposed to be split between all the granddaughters. Her argument: she was the oldest, so she deserved it more. The fact that she later sold most of it to fund her lifestyle didn't seem to bother anyone else in the family. After months of tension and passive-aggressive family dinners, we supposedly buried the hatchet last summer when she apologized. I say supposedly because while she said all the right words, her actions never really changed. Still, I decided to be the bigger person and give our relationship another chance. This Christmas, I decided to go all out. She had been talking non-stop about wanting to visit this luxury ski resort in Colorado for months, but couldn't afford it because she had spent too much on her new car, which she made sure everyone knew was more expensive than mine. So I booked her a week-long stay there, complete with ski passes and spa treatments. It cost me a small fortune, but I thought it would be a perfect way to truly mend our relationship. I hosted Christmas dinner this year at my house, When she arrived, she didn't even bring a gift bag or anything. I didn't mention it immediately, thinking maybe she left it in her car. During dinner, I finally asked her if she'd left the gifts in her car. Her response was typical. She started making excuses about how busy she'd been with work and how she had to get gifts for her yoga instructor and hairstylist, basically admitting she'd completely forgotten about me. She expected me to understand, of course. She said all this while looking around my dining room with obvious disapproval. Then she started criticizing my china set, suggesting I should upgrade to something more modern. When I explained that they were my mother's, she just made a dismissive noise and moved on to criticizing the sauce I'd made. She asked if it was store-bought, and when I told her I'd made it from scratch using our grandmother's recipe, she made a condescending remark about how not everyone could make it as well as Grandma did. Despite her attitude, I still gave her the envelope containing the resort reservation. When she opened it, her eyes lit up, but instead of thanking me, she made a backhanded comment about being surprised I could afford it. Then she had the nerve to complain that I hadn't booked her the premium suite instead of the standard one. She spent the rest of the evening showing the booking confirmation to everyone else, bragging about how she'd finally get to use her designer ski outfits, making sure to mention that it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Between showing off the reservation, she kept making snide remarks about how quaint my holiday decorations were. The resort was a 4-hour drive away, and she was planning to leave early the next morning. That night, after everyone left, I made a decision. I called the resort and canceled the reservation. Yes, I had to pay a cancellation fee, but it was worth every penny. The next day, I tracked her social media posts. She posted several photos during her drive bragging about heading to the exclusive resort. Then, about 4 hours later, there was radio silence. Around dinner time, my phone exploded with messages. When she reached the resort and found out there was no reservation under her name, she called me in a rage. She was screaming about how embarrassing it was and demanding to know what I'd done. I threw her own words back at her, saying I was sorry but I'd been so busy I'd forgotten to tell her. Didn't she understand? This made her even angrier, and she started complaining about wasting gas money and how she'd already told everyone on social media about the trip. I just responded with the same condescending tone she'd used about my sauce, saying I guess not everyone could nail their vacation plans like she usually did. She threatened to tell the whole family, and she did. But when she tried to paint herself as the victim, I simply showed everyone our text history from the past year, her social media posts, mocking my house and lifestyle, and reminded them about the heirloom jewelry incident. She's too proud to admit to her social media followers that she never actually stayed at the resort, so she had to make up excuses about why she came back early. Last I heard, she told everyone there was a plumbing emergency at her house. Now she has to explain to her followers why she isn't posting any luxury ski resort photos, deal with the embarrassment of driving all that way for nothing. The family is divided on this one, but I've noticed that some of my other cousins who she's wronged over the years have been quietly sending me supportive messages. Turns out I wasn't the only one who was tired of her attitude. Back in Denmark, walking home after a few beers is just normal, but I guess I learned the hard way that things work differently in Iowa. I had always dreamed of studying in the United States. When I got accepted into the exchange program at a university in Iowa, I was thrilled. My parents were proud. I was the first in our family to study abroad. The program was for 1 semester, and everything had been going perfectly until that last night. Throughout my time there, I've made some good friends among the other international students and some Americans too. We'd study together, hang out at campus events, and sometimes grab dinner at the local places. I kept my drinking minimal, usually just a beer or two when we went out, which wasn't often since I was focused on my studies. The night before my flight back to Denmark, my friends insisted on taking me out for farewell drinks. It was just going to be a couple of beers at this bar about 600 yards from my apartment. Nothing crazy since I had to pack and catch my flight the next day. At the bar, my friends raised their glasses and toasted to me, thanking me for all the great memories. I thanked them back for making my time there amazing. One of them mentioned how much they'd miss having me around in class. I told them I'd miss them too, and reminded them they were all welcome to visit me in Denmark anytime. After 2 beers, I decided to call it a night. It was around 10 p.m., and I still had some packing to do. One of my friends offered to call me an Uber, but I declined, explaining it was just a short walk. Another friend warned me about how strict things were there, but I assured them I'd be fine since I only had 2 beers. I promised to text when I got home. I waved goodbye and started walking. The night was clear, and I was feeling good about my time in America. That's when I saw the police car's lights flash behind me. The first officer ordered me to stop and asked if I'd been drinking that night. I honestly told him I'd had 2 beers at the bar with friends, explaining I was just walking home and could even see my building from where we were. The second officer then told me that walking on a public sidewalk after drinking was illegal in Iowa. I tried explaining that I was an exchange student from Denmark and this was my last night before flying home. Instead of understanding, the first officer told me to put my hands behind my back, saying I was under arrest for public intoxication. I protested, saying I wasn't even drunk, but the second officer said my admission to drinking was enough probable cause. They handcuffed me and put me in the back of their car. They drove me to a jail 20 minutes away from campus. The whole time, I kept thinking about my flight and my unfinished packing. At the jail, the booking officer asked for my name and nationality. I told him I was from Denmark and tried explaining that I had a flight the next day, pleading that this was all a misunderstanding. He just coldly told me that I'd see a judge in the morning, making a snide comment about hoping I didn't have any important plans. They put me in a cell with 2 other guys. I sat there all night, barely sleeping, worried about missing my flight and what my parents would say. The next morning they released me but handed me a court summons for 3 weeks later. When I explained to the court clerk that I couldn't come back in 3 weeks because my visa was expiring and I had university starting back home, she dismissively told me that wasn't her problem and warned that missing the court date would result in a warrant for my arrest. I asked if I could just pay the fine then and there, but she said I needed to appear before the judge. I had to make a decision. I couldn't miss the start of my semester back home, and I definitely couldn't afford another plane ticket to come back for court. After talking to my parents and doing some research, I decided to risk it and take my flight home. A month later, I received an email from the court saying I had been found guilty in absentia and fined $500. Plus, a warrant was issued for my arrest. I consulted with a lawyer back in Denmark who specialized in international law. The lawyer explained that while my actions wouldn't be considered a crime in most countries, missing the court date could potentially affect my ability to enter the United States in the future. When I asked if this meant I could never go back, he assured me it wasn't necessarily the case. He explained we could work with an American attorney to resolve this, noting that since it was a minor offense and I was a student with no prior record, we might be able to get the warrant dismissed by paying the fine and explaining the circumstances. 2 months later, after some back and forth with an American lawyer, I got the warrant cleared by paying the fine and court costs. The lawyer also helped get the charge reduced to a simple citation, which meant it wouldn't affect my ability to return to the United States in the future. The whole experience cost me about $2,000 in legal fees and fines, but at least I can travel to the US again if I want to. Though honestly, I think I'll stick to countries where walking home after 2 beers isn't considered a crime. I still keep in touch with my American friends. Apparently, that certain college town was notorious for strict enforcement of public intoxication laws. They told me the police there regularly patrol around bars, targeting students who try to walk home instead of driving or getting a ride. One of my friends texted me later saying they couldn't believe I was arrested for that, promising that most places in America weren't this crazy. I replied that at least it makes for an interesting story, but joked the next time I visit, I'd be memorizing every Uber driver's number in town. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.